One sportsbook has released LSU's projected 2025 football win total, and you are not going to like it. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. And as always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. The LSU-South Carolina clash with the women's basketball programs has been postponed. We'll get into that in a little bit. Garrett Nussmeier's updated Heisman odds. I know you're going to like this. What you will not like, however, is where we will begin. And that is posted 2025 win totals for much of the Southeastern Conference from one sportsbook. Now, as you know, we are great partners here with FanDuel, and we always encourage you to use FanDuel, download the FanDuel app. But FanDuel is one platform among many that will release odds and sometimes futures bets, as they're called. Earlier this week, we talked about FanDuel releasing the early lines for some marquee 2025 college football matchups, like LSU at Clemson in the opener, where the LSU Tigers are projected 2.5-point underdog in that game. Well, sportsbook.ag has released their projected win total. So they give a number, and you can either bet over or under for the season how many wins you think that team will get. I won't bury the lead. I'll tell you where they have LSU, and then I'll go through some of the rest of the SEC, and I'll circle back, tell you why I think LSU's number is where it is. They are projecting LSU at 8.5 wins, the exact number LSU was on for 2024. Effectively saying they think LSU will either be 9-3 or 8-4. Now, I want to be very clear. It would be a cataclysmic failure if LSU football in 2025 goes either 8-4 or 9-3. Anything less than 10-2 is going to be a failure, because 10-2 is what's going to get you into the playoff. And that's what we're all looking at and saying that's where you have to be, right, if you want to get in. Think Ohio State this year. They lose really tough game at Oregon. They lose the regular season finale to Michigan. They were 10-2. They got in. They played their best. They won a national championship. That's what a 12-team playoff allows. Tennessee this year, 10-2, got in the playoff. Ole Miss, very good football team, 9-3, out. So 10-2 is your absolute basement. And so these projections here are not looking favorably toward LSU. I want to come and give you some more reaction to that and tell you why I think that number is what it is. But let me first run through the rest of what they have, the posted numbers for the SEC schools. So at the top, Georgia and Texas, each at over under 10.5. Effectively thinking they go 11-1 or 10-2. Of course, the two teams that played in the SEC championship game this year, and of course, both made the college football playoff. The other playoff team from the SEC was Tennessee, and their number is at 9.5. Ole Miss and Alabama, both at 9. You know I got thoughts of that. LSU 8.5. Texas A&M 8. Oklahoma 7. Ooh. This is the big shocker to many. Florida and South Carolina, two media darlings, 6.5. Basically saying they think Florida, South Carolina go 7-5, 6-6. And then Auburn at 5.5. And if Auburn is below 500 again, that may be it for Hugh Freeze. But I believe when I'm looking at preseason projections, I consider two things. And so if you're an everydayer, thank you for that. You've heard me say this. Before season starts, I look at two things to determine how I'm projecting a team that year. I look at fewest questions on the roster against the most manageable schedule. Why did I project Texas to be a playoff team this year? Because I saw what they had returning. Quinn Ewers, a ton on that defense. They brought in some really strong talent out of the portal as well. And they had the most manageable schedule of any team in the SEC. Period. It's that simple. I don't know that I thought Texas was a great team this year, but they should have been a playoff team because of their schedule. So when I looked at Ole Miss, it was similar. Ole Miss had a very manageable schedule, and they threw up on themselves and blew a great opportunity to be a playoff team with a roster they spent somewhere which has been averaged around $18 million on that roster, and they missed the playoffs because they went 9-3. So that's what I look at. Fewest questions, most manageable schedule. When you look at LSU's roster, there aren't a lot of questions. Now, at least questions that we feel like you have an answer. You return Garrett Nussmeier, who's the leading returning passer in the country. He's the only 4,000-yard passer returning for 2025. You return Caden Durham. Yes, you lose your top 3 pass catchers and 4 starters on your offensive line, and that's what a lot of people are going to focus on. They're going to look at returning or production or production lost, and they're going to go, man, Kyron Lacey, CJ Daniels, Mason Taylor, Emory Jones, Will Campbell, Miles Frazier, Garrett Dellinger. You're losing 4 starters on your offensive line, your top 3 pass catchers. How do you replace that? Well, I turn around and I go, well, you signed 2 starting offensive linemen out of the portal. You added 3 receivers and 2 tight ends out of the portal as well, all that are starting caliber players. I think LSU's offense with Nussmeier pulling the trigger is better in 2025 than they were in 2024, because you're still going to return guys like Aaron Anderson and Xavier Thomas. And we saw what Chris Hilton, when healthy, can look like. And now you're adding Nick Anderson and Barrion Brown to that group as well. Oh, there's a lot of reason for excitement with that LSU offense. And then defensively, how much better are you year to year? And that's a giant question. We don't have the answer. But one thing that I think is objectively true is that LSU, when you put Blake Baker in the kitchen, the ingredients he has to cook with in 2025 are better than 2024. You look at the interior of the defensive line, by Brian Kelly's own admission, coming out of spring, it was a must address. All they added was JVR Suggs, a situational interior rusher. And you still managed to maximize that position group. Another year with Bo Davis, and you're getting Jacoby and Guillory back. You look at linebacker, West and Whit Weeks both returning. Whit was among the leading tacklers in the country this year. Obviously, look at what you have at cornerback coming in with a 5-star and DJ Pickett. You've brought Mansour Delane in from Virginia Tech, Jakeem Jackson from Florida, and then you're returning a starter in Ashton Stamps. And then I think a lot of people are high on some of the young talent at cornerback as well, to see how they may grow and develop. So safety is still a giant question, but you added to Marcus Cooley, who was an all-conference caliber player at NC State this past year and is a plug-and-play starter for you, and you may still add another. So all that to say, when I look at LSU's roster defensively, oh, by the way, Harold Perkins is returning too. Let me not forget the guy that was the preseason SEC Defensive Player of the Year is returning as well. You're objectively a more talented defense than you are in 2025 than you were in 2024. Can Blake Baker get all those parts to mesh together? That's really the big question. So then you really just have to look at the schedule and say, okay, find me 3 losses. Well, remember, LSU opens up at Clemson, and the early line from FanDuel has Clemson as a 2.5-point favorite. So you'd have to look at that as a loss for LSU. I'm not saying LSU will win. I'm just talking about if you're projecting where you get that number. Then LSU plays Louisiana Tech, and they're home against Florida. They play Florida early September, which is really interesting that you're going to play Florida that early. But LSU, and based on what we just saw there, as Florida projected 6.5 wins, I mean, LSU, remember, dominated, controlled that game against Florida in the Swamp, controlled the football for 42 minutes and managed to lose. Costly penalty, took a touchdown off the board. You had some turnovers. It was unfortunate. You really let one get away from you. But you'll be favored against Florida. Southeastern's in Baton Rouge. Then you go to Ole Miss. And that's going to be one where the odds makers are going, okay, hang that with as LSU as an underdog alongside the Clemson game. You're home against South Carolina. Remember, the odds makers have South Carolina 6.5, same way as Florida. So you get both Florida and South Carolina early in the season in Baton Rouge. You got to go to Nashville to play Vandy, where you'll be a favorite. You get A&M at home, where you'll be a favorite. You got to go to Alabama. And that's one that they're looking at because Alabama, they have it as the over-under at 9 wins. Now, I want to come back and talk about Alabama again, but we'll keep moving. You're at home against Arkansas. You're home against Western Kentucky. Then you're at Oklahoma, who, remember, they have projected as just 7 wins. So there's your three. Clemson, Ole Miss, Alabama. All 3 true road games for LSU. And then you look and say, all right, do they stub their toe somewhere? Do they stub their toe in Norman? Do they stub their toe at home against South Carolina or Florida? Maybe at Vanderbilt? Is there one of those swing games that goes against LSU that gets you to 4 losses? But here's the problem that I have. I think the projections for Bama and Ole Miss are high. And I think that's going to be my big difference here. Bama at 9, I don't see. You are losing Jalen Milroe. Alabama had more than 20 players again this year enter the transfer portal. When you start to look at the amount of players they're losing now for the second consecutive year, to be exact, Alabama lost out of the portal. Forgive me, I have it right here. Alabama lost 24 players in the transfer portal. So you lose 24 players in the portal, not to count the guys you're losing to the draft and to eligibility. You are, again, for the second year, turning over half your roster. And we saw plain as day, Kalen DeBoer ain't Nick Saban. And now you're going to lose Jalen Milroe and very likely be starting either Ty Simpson or a true freshman, the kid they signed in this class that everybody's really high on. But if you're going to try to tell me that you're banking on a true freshman starting for you at quarterback, and that's going to be the thing that catapults you forward, brother. We just saw Oklahoma try to play that game with a redshirt freshman 5-star, and that didn't go so hot. It's a dangerous game you're playing if you want to hand the reins to a true freshman like that. So I think Bama struggles, and then also Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss in 2025 is what Florida State was in 2024. I'm not projecting that they're going to go win 2 games. But what we saw from Florida State in 2023 was they had Jordan Travis returning, and they went all in. They added Braden Fisk. They had Jared Verse, Keon Coleman. They added via the portal. They were all in with a veteran quarterback and a manageable schedule to try to win a national championship. They went undefeated. Unfortunate injury to Jordan Travis. They didn't give it a shot to play for it. But subsequently, they lost all of that talent. And what happened? They face planted. And I think Ole Miss is gunning for a face plant. I'm not telling you they're going to be a 2-win team, but you lose Jackson Dart and Trey Harris and Walter Nolan, and you're losing all those guys that were your Princely Monmielen, all those key impact guys from this year's team. And now you got to do it again. You are destined for a step back. I think this is a disappointing step back year for Ole Miss. So those are 2 true road games LSU has to play, at Bama, at Ole Miss, where the odds makers today think more highly of those teams than I do. And I think by the time we get there, you're going to see a regression for those 2 teams. For me, right now, you're asking me LSU over under 8.5. I am hammering over 8.5 because of what LSU has invested and because the schedule, while parts look daunting, at Ole Miss, at Clemson, at Alabama, at Oklahoma, at Vanderbilt, you can look and go, that looks daunting. But when you actually start to peel back the layers of the onion, it looks far more manageable. And then remember, we always look at where are those open dates. You know, where do you get the opportunity to step back and take a breather? Well, after Ole Miss, before you host South Carolina, you get your first open date. You're going to get that other open date before you play Alabama. So there's going to be opportunities for LSU. And by the way, before you play Oklahoma on the road, you get Western Kentucky at home. You know, before you have to play, before you go to Ole Miss, you're hosting Southeastern Louisiana. So you avoid that really treacherous stretch on the schedule at any point. You know, the point you would think without a breather is at Ole Miss, home against South Carolina, at Vanderbilt, home against Texas A&M right there. But remember, you get the bye after the Ole Miss game before you host South Carolina. And then you got to go to Vandy before you host A&M. And I think both of those are very winnable games. You'll really avoid the treacherous stretch. So I like LSU schedule an awful lot. And that's why I think they will be over that number. But how far over that total they go will certainly determine if they're a playoff team and will dictate the success and how it's determined for the 2025 LSU football team. Big part of that will also be Garrett Nussmeier. We got his updated Heisman odds next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Talkspace. You know, therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, help you communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge. That's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider. It makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. And with Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your own home, and you can even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay. It has never been easier to prioritize mental health. And as a listener of Locked On LSU, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege and enter the promo code SPACE80. That's space 80. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege, enter the promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for Locked On LSU. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege, promo code SPACE80. So if LSU does, in fact, get to the college football playoff in 2025, Garrett Nussmeier is going to have to be a massive part of that. And not surprisingly, and LSU quarterbacks kind of have earned this reputation now. When you look at Joe Burrow winning a Heisman Trophy, Jaden Daniels winning a Heisman Trophy, and then Garrett Nussmeier this past season throwing for 4,000 yards, Garrett Nussmeier has the second best odds to win the 2025 Heisman Trophy. Arch Manning at 6-1, Garrett Nussmeier 9-1. Incidentally, the quarterback that Garrett Nussmeier and LSU will face in the opener, Cade Klubnik of Clemson, is at 12-1, just behind Nussmeier. He's tied with Jeremiah Smith, the fantastic receiver from Ohio State. Some other notables: DJ Lagway from Florida at 16-1, Lenora Sellers of South Carolina also at 16-1, Nico Iamaleava of Tennessee at 16-1. Just looking at players that LSU is going to face in 2020, in 2025. What's really interesting, though, is, and Nussmeier is very worthy of being at or near the top of a list like this. The significance of it isn't very much. We'll talk about that here in a second. But Garrett Nussmeier threw for 4,052 yards in 2024. He was second in the SEC in passing yards, behind only Jackson Dart. He was fifth in the country in passing yards. And Nussmeier is the only quarterback in the country for 2025 returning that threw for over 4,000 yards in 2024. If you're wondering about passing touchdowns, Quinn Ewers had 31. Nussmeier and Dart tied with 29. And of course, Quinn Ewers played in 14 games this season as Texas played in the SEC championship game and then 3 college football playoff games. He did miss a couple of games in the middle of the season due to injury when Arch Manning started in his place. But all that to say, you're looking at a quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier who is accomplished, who is veteran, and who's in an offense where he's going to put up numbers, and presumably a team that you expect will have a lot of success on the field. Now, I mentioned why these early Heisman odds may not amount to much. So I just went back and looked at the previous 3 seasons to kind of give you some context on where the favorites at this time, right, when the odds opened, the favorites at this time, where they were and where they finished. So the four last year at this time, the betting favorite when the odds opened was Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe was the betting favorite. He was not a Heisman finalist. The four finalists, two of them didn't even have odds. Ashton Genty and Cam Ward did not even have odds at this point. Dylan Gabriel was 9-1, and the winner, Travis Hunter, was 50-1. So you made a pretty nice chunk of change if you put a little small something on Travis Hunter at this time a year ago. Go back 2 years ago when Jaden Daniels won it. The preseason favorite was the returning Heisman winner, Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams was not a Heisman finalist. Jaden Daniels was 20-1. He ended up winning it. Michael Penix and Bo Nix reached 12-1, so they had better odds than Daniels. And Marvin Harrison, the other finalist, was a long shot at 50-1. Now go back 3 seasons to 2022. CJ Stroud, that was the year Caleb Williams won it. CJ Stroud was the betting favorite when it opened. He was 5-1. He ended up being a finalist. He was the runner-up to Caleb Williams, who was at 12-1. The other two finalists, Stetson Bennett, Max Duggan, didn't even have odds. So the point is, only one of the last 3 initial favorites even made it to New York as a Heisman finalist. That was CJ Stroud in 2022. The last 2 years with Caleb Williams and Jalen Milroe didn't even make it to the Heisman ceremony as a finalist in the past 2 seasons. And only 2 of the last 12 finalists. So look at the last 3 years, 4 finalists each. 2 of those 12 had odds under 10-1. And 4 of them were all the way off the board. Duggan, Bennett, Genty, and Ward. So the point is, all that to say, that's a lot of odds, it's a lot of names, it's a lot of numbers. Just suffice to say that just because you're a betting favorite now doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win the award. It don't even mean you're going to be in New York, because of the last 3 years, the only players who were the preseason favorites to win the award that ended up in New York was CJ Stroud in 2022. And 4 of the 12 that ended up in New York didn't even have odds at this point. So long season and a long way to go. But Arch Manning, Garrett Nussmeier, Cade Klubnik, right there at the top of the list for the 2025 Heisman Trophy. And one thing's for certain. In this LSU offense, Garrett Nussmeier, provided he stays upright and healthy, and knock on Formica, we all hope he does, Garrett Nussmeier is going to put up the stats that will warrant Heisman consideration. The question is, will the team success follow? And that's the thing that could potentially limit him from getting there and ultimately winning the award. The stats will be there. Will the team success be there? If it is, Garrett Nussmeier could become LSU's 4th Heisman Trophy winner, but a long way to go. All right, we'll put a button here on Locked on LSU next. Stick around. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Attending NFL playoff games is really an experience like no other. 2006, I was at the divisional round playoff game in the Dome when the Saints beat the Eagles, went up to Chicago for the NFC Championship game in the snow. That one didn't go so great for the Hoodats. Remember being at the wild card round, the divisional round in 2009 when the Saints beat Arizona. Of course, that season they would go on to win the Super Bowl. The energy, the excitement, the connection with the fans, it's unmatched. Remember the thrill of seeing your favorite team clinch a playoff win, and think about being there. It's a memory that you'll never forget. And this year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Time Picks. It filters out the fluff. It shows you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters, being there. So use Game Time Picks. They curate deals to make it easier to find the best prices on great seats. I love the Super Deal, which is the best value for that event. You can see your seats before you buy. They've got on-time ticket delivery, the lowest price guarantee, even event cancellation protection and job loss protection. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem with the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Well, Thursday was supposed to be a really significant day in women's basketball for LSU and South Carolina, but because of the Arctic blast that has covered the South and part of the East Coast, that game was postponed. Travel out of Baton Rouge, no doubt, was challenging for LSU, and then of course Columbia was hit as well there on the East Coast. So the game has been delayed from Thursday to Friday, and the really disappointing part of this is this was supposed to be a primetime game Thursday on ESPN with so much of the college basketball world watching. Kim Mulkey and the Tigers undefeated, 20-0 on the season right now, 5-0 in the SEC, ranked 5th, going up to Columbia to take on Dawn Staley's Gamecocks, 18-1, 6-0 in the SEC. And now that game's been moved to 4 o'clock Central Time. So it had to be adjusted for TV, because TV runs the world. And part of me looks at it and says that's disappointing, but the other part says that could actually play in LSU's favor, because, and we've seen this not only in basketball but in football, and sometimes when games and start times are adjusted at the last minute, it's hard sometimes for fans to get to those games. I remember, of course, you might remember in 2015 when LSU played South Carolina in football in Baton Rouge, which ended up being the last game Steve Spurrier would ever coach. That was a game that was supposed to be in Columbia, South Carolina. There was widespread flooding. They moved the game to Baton Rouge, and it was a South Carolina home game in Baton Rouge. Well, LSU fans had many of it planned for a weekend for a road game. So if you already had stuff going on, you weren't planning to do a day of tailgating or be at Tiger Stadium. You're planning maybe to spend those 3 hours watching the game from wherever you were, but you couldn't adjust your plan. So the attendance wasn't great. And that happened. So part of me looks at this and goes, might actually play in LSU's favor a smidge. You would have had an incredible crowd. You may still in Columbia, because it's LSU coming in. It's Kim Mulkey. It's the last 2 national championship teams. But you also look at it and say, it may not be as great a crowd because it's 4 o'clock on a Friday instead of, a night game in prime time on Thursday with College Game Day there, which, by the way, College Game Day was supposed to be on site for LSU and South Carolina for the first time in a women's game this year. That now has been canceled. So a lot of the luster around the game has been taken away. And as much of a bummer as that is, again, it's not a bad thing if you take the environment down a few notches when LSU's got to go play in Columbia. So LSU, for what it's worth, we're waiting for that line to be posted, but ESPN's analytics give South Carolina an 87% chance of winning that game against LSU there in Columbia. So Tigers have not had an awful lot of success against South Carolina, as we well know, since Kim Mulkey has been here, and Dawn Staley's program has been awesome. I mean, there's no way around it. They are the defending national champion. When LSU has run up against South Carolina last year, lost to South Carolina 76-70 in Baton Rouge, and then lost in the NCAA tournament as well, 79-72. So it's just a hill that since Kim Mulkey has been here, they've not been able to climb. 2 years ago, LSU went and gave South Carolina all they wanted. Forgive me, that was the game that LSU lost 88-64 2 years ago when they went to Columbia 2 seasons ago, forgive me. And then in Kim Mulkey's first year in Baton Rouge, the Tigers played South Carolina and lost a close one, 66-60. So LSU's played them close, but they've yet to beat South Carolina since Kim Mulkey has been the head coach. They'll have another opportunity that's just been moved now from Thursday to Friday, 4 o'clock on ESPN in Columbia. We'll be watching. Okay, that'll do it for us here on today's episode of Locked on LSU. Thanks for making us your first listen. Now for your second listen, how about you go check out my guy Chris Gordy and Locked on SEC. You can get the links in the description of this episode, wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. If you are on podcasts, thank you so much. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.